In a world where royal headlines often focus on controversy and conflict, there exists a different story waiting to be told. It's a story that unfolds not in palace halls or formal ceremonies, but in the laughter of children who have found hope in the most unexpected places. It's about two people who chose to step away from everything they knew to create something entirely new, carrying with them a mission that would touch the lives of countless young souls across the globe. Picture this: a small hand reaching out to touch a stranger's face, eyes wide with wonder and trust. A giggle that breaks through years of trauma. A moment where titles and status disappear, leaving only pure human connection. This is where a story begins, not with crowns and protocol, but with the simple, powerful act of seeing and being seen. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex didn't just leave their royal duties behind. They embarked on a journey that would redefine what it means to serve. Their path would lead them to children who had lost everything, to young people fighting for their futures, and to communities where hope seemed like a luxury few could afford. What they discovered along the way would change not only the lives they touched, but their own understanding of purpose, family, and the true meaning of making a difference. This is their story, raw, real, and filled with moments that will restore your faith in humanity's capacity for compassion. It's about finding light in the darkest places and proving that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what you hold on to, but in what you're willing to let go. The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground as Prince Harry stepped out of the black SUV, his wife Meghan close behind him. The sounds of children's voices carried on the California breeze, a mixture of English and Spanish that painted the air with hope and possibility. This wasn't a formal royal engagement with red carpets and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. This was different. This was real. The couple had arrived at the Assistance League of Los Angeles, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping vulnerable children in the community. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be visiting, but what the children didn't expect was how naturally Harry and Meghan would blend into their world, leaving their titles at the door and simply showing up as two people who cared. 8-year-old Maria was the first to approach them. She had been living in the organization's transitional housing program with her mother after they fled an abusive situation. Her dark eyes held a wariness that spoke of experiences no child should have, yet there was something about the way Meghan knelt down to her level that made Maria take a tentative step forward. "I like your dress," Maria whispered, reaching out to touch the soft fabric of Meghan's simple navy blue outfit. "Thank you, sweetheart," Meghan replied, her voice gentle and unhurried. "I like your backpack. Is that a butterfly on it?" Maria nodded enthusiastically, and suddenly, the wall she had built around herself began to crumble. She began talking about her love for butterflies, how they reminded her that things could change and become beautiful, even after difficult times. Meghan listened intently, asking questions and sharing her own thoughts about transformation and growth. Meanwhile, Harry had gravitated toward a group of teenage boys who were initially skeptical of his presence. They had heard about royalty in movies and books, but this red-haired man in jeans and sneakers seemed nothing like their preconceived notions. Marcus, a 15-year-old who had aged out of foster care and was living independently while finishing high school, decided to test the waters. "So, you're actually a prince?" Marcus asked with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Harry laughed, a genuine sound that cut through any pretense. "I am, but honestly, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I used to be a lot like you guys. I lost my mom when I was young, and I spent a lot of years angry and confused. The difference was I had people around me who could help, and resources most kids don't have. That doesn't seem fair, does it?" The boys exchanged glances. This wasn't what they expected. Marcus found himself opening up about his struggles with finding stable housing while trying to maintain his grades. Harry listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he truly understood the weight of what these young people were carrying. The thing is, Harry continued, being royal doesn't make you special. What makes you special is how you choose to treat other people, especially when life gets tough. And from what I can see, you guys are already pretty extraordinary. As the afternoon progressed, what had started as a formal visit transformed into something much more meaningful. Meghan found herself in the art room, helping younger children with a painting project. She wasn't directing or instructing. Instead, she was learning from them, marveling at their creativity and resilience. 10-year-old Carlos, who had been in the program for 6 months while his grandmother fought for custody, showed Meghan his painting of a house surrounded by a garden. "This is where I want to live someday," he explained, "with my abuela, and we'll grow vegetables and flowers together." "That sounds beautiful, Carlos," Meghan said, picking up a brush to add some details to the sky in his painting. "What kind of flowers will you plant?" "Sunflowers," Carlos said without hesitation, "because they're tall and strong, and they always look toward the sun, even when it's cloudy." The simple wisdom in his words struck Meghan deeply. Here was a child who had faced uncertainty and displacement, yet he spoke with such clarity about hope and resilience. She found herself thinking about her own son, Archie, safe at home, and feeling a profound sense of responsibility to ensure that all children could feel that same security. In another corner of the facility, Harry had joined a group of teenagers in the computer lab, where they were working on college applications and job searches. He wasn't offering empty encouragement or platitudes. Instead, he was rolling up his sleeves and helping them navigate the complex systems that often seem designed to keep them out rather than welcome them in. "I'm not smart enough for college," confided Jasmine, a 17-year-old who had been raising her 2 younger siblings while their mother battled addiction. "That's not true," Harry said firmly but kindly. "The fact that you've been keeping your family together while maintaining your grades tells me you're incredibly smart. The system might tell you otherwise, but I'm telling you that you have everything it takes to succeed. We just need to figure out how to get you the support you need." He spent the next hour helping Jasmine research scholarship opportunities and connect with mentors who could guide her through the application process. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was exactly the kind of practical support that could change the trajectory of a young person's life. As the day drew to a close, something remarkable had happened. The children who had been shy and reserved at the beginning were now clustered around Harry and Meghan, sharing stories, asking questions, and simply enjoying the feeling of being truly seen and heard by adults who cared about them not as photo opportunities, but as individuals with their own dreams and challenges. The staff at the Assistance League later described it as one of the most natural and impactful visits they had ever experienced. There were no staged moments or artificial interactions. Instead, Harry and Meghan had simply shown up as themselves, ready to listen, learn, and connect on a human level. As they prepared to leave, Maria tugged on Meghan's dress one more time. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Meghan knelt down again, taking Maria's hands in hers. "We will absolutely come back. And in the meantime, I want you to remember something, okay? You are brave, you are strong, and you deserve all the beautiful things life has to offer. Don't let anyone tell you differently." The drive back to their Montecito home was quiet, both Harry and Meghan processing what they had experienced. They had walked into that facility as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but they were leaving as something more important: advocates, allies, and friends of children who needed to know that someone believed in them. "Did you see how Carlos talked about his sunflowers?" Meghan finally broke the silence. Harry nodded, and how Marcus opened up about his living situation. These kids have been through so much, but they're still fighting for their dreams. It's humbling. They began talking about how they could do more, not just through occasional visits, but through sustained action that could create lasting change. This wasn't about charity or noblesse oblige. It was about recognizing the inherent dignity and potential in every child and working to create systems that supported rather than hindered their growth. That evening, as they tucked Archie into bed, both Harry and Meghan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had left their royal roles to create something new, and days like this reminded them why that choice had been so important. They weren't just building a different life for themselves. They were working to build a different world for all children, one relationship at a time. The seeds of what would become their ongoing commitment to youth advocacy had been planted that day, nourished by the honest conversations, genuine connections, and profound respect they had experienced with the children at the Assistance League. It was the beginning of a journey that would take them to communities around the world, but it all started with the simple act of showing up and listening to what young people had to say. As Megan turned off Archie's bedroom light, she thought about Maria's question about coming back. It wasn't just about returning to that particular facility. It was about showing up consistently for children who had learned not to trust promises from adults. In that moment, she and Harry made a silent commitment that would guide their work for years to come. They would keep coming back again and again until every child knew they mattered. 3 months after their visit to the Assistance League, Harry and Megan found themselves on a plane bound for New York City. This time, their mission was different but equally important. They were heading to meet with youth activists who were working to create change in their communities, particularly focusing on mental health awareness and support for young people. The venue was a community center in Brooklyn, where teenagers from across the 5 boroughs had gathered for what organizers called a youth mental health summit. These weren't just any teenagers. They were young people who had experienced trauma, loss, and challenges that would test the resilience of even the strongest adults. Yet they had chosen to channel their pain into purpose, becoming advocates for themselves and their peers. 17-year-old Zara was the first to catch Harry's attention as they entered the bustling community center. She stood confidently at the front of a small group, leading a discussion about anxiety management techniques. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through what she was teaching, and her peers listened with the kind of respect that can't be manufactured or commanded. The thing about anxiety, Zara was saying as Harry quietly joined the circle, is that it lies to you. It tells you that you're not strong enough, smart enough, or brave enough to handle whatever you're facing. But the truth is, if you're here today, if you've made it through everything that brought you to this moment, you're already proving anxiety wrong. Harry waited until the group had finished their discussion before approaching Zara. That was incredibly powerful, he said simply. How long have you been facilitating groups like this? Zara's confident demeanor shifted slightly, revealing the teenager beneath the activist. About a year, she admitted. I started after my brother died by suicide. I was angry at everyone. The school counselors who didn't understand, the adults who kept telling me to just talk to someone without understanding that talking doesn't fix everything. So I decided to create a space where we could actually help each other. The rawness of her honesty hit Harry like a physical force. He thought about his own struggles with mental health after his mother's death, the years of suppressed grief and anger that had nearly derailed his life. The difference was that he had eventually found professional help and support systems that weren't available to many of these young people. I'm sorry about your brother, Harry said, his voice carrying the weight of his own loss. And I'm sorry that the adults around you didn't know how to help. But what you've built here, this community you've created, that's extraordinary. Zara studied his face, looking for signs of the empty sympathy she had grown accustomed to receiving from well-meaning adults. Instead, she saw genuine understanding and respect. You get it, don't you? She asked quietly. I do, Harry replied. I lost my mom when I was 12, and I spent a lot of years pretending I was okay when I wasn't. The difference is I had resources and people around me who eventually helped me find my way. Not everyone has that, and that's not okay. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of applause from across the room, where Megan was participating in a workshop led by a group of young women focused on supporting teen mothers and pregnant teenagers. The facilitator was 16-year-old Destiny, who had given birth to her daughter 6 months earlier and was now advocating for better support systems for young parents in the education system. Society tells us that becoming a mother as a teenager means your life is over. Destiny was explaining to the group, which included other teen mothers as well as social workers and educators. But that's not true. Yes, it's challenging, and yes, we need more support. But we're not statistics or cautionary tales. We're young women who are capable of being amazing mothers and achieving our dreams. Megan listened intently as Destiny shared her experiences trying to navigate high school while caring for an infant. The lack of adequate childcare, the judgment from some teachers and peers, the financial strain on her family. These were challenges that required systemic solutions, not just individual resilience. What would have made the biggest difference for you? Megan asked when Destiny finished her presentation. Childcare at school. Destiny answered without hesitation. If there had been a safe place for my daughter while I attended classes, everything would have been easier. But also adults who saw my potential instead of just my mistakes. I'm still the same smart, ambitious person I was before I became a mom. I just need different kinds of support now. The conversation that followed was eye-opening for everyone in the room. These young mothers weren't asking for pity or handouts. They were advocating for practical solutions that would allow them to continue their education and build stable futures for their children. Their insights were sophisticated, and their proposed solutions were thoughtful and realistic. As the afternoon progressed, Harry and Megan found themselves drawn into deeper conversations with young activists who were working on issues ranging from food insecurity to educational equity to LGBTQ+ rights. These teenagers had a clarity of vision and a sense of urgency that was both inspiring and sobering. 18-year-old Malik, who had been homeless for periods during his junior and senior years of high school, had started a nonprofit organization that provided emergency supplies and temporary housing assistance to homeless youth. He spoke passionately about the invisibility of youth homelessness and the unique challenges faced by young people who aged out of foster care without family support. People think homeless youth are all runaways or delinquents, Malik explained as he showed Harry and Megan around the resource center his organization had established in a donated storefront. But most of us are just kids who had nowhere else to go. I graduated valedictorian of my high school class while staying in shelters and friends' couches. We're not broken. The systems are broken. His organization had helped connect over 200 young people with temporary housing, job training, and educational support in just 2 years. The impact was measurable and significant, but Malik was frustrated by how difficult it was to get adults in positions of power to take youth homelessness seriously. They want us to be grateful for scraps instead of demanding the support we actually need, he continued. But we're not going to apologize for asking for the same opportunities that housed kids take for granted. Harry was struck by the parallel between Malik's frustration and his own experiences with institutional systems that claimed to care while maintaining structures that perpetuated problems. How can we amplify your voice? He asked. What do you need from adults who want to support this work? Listen to us, Malik said firmly. Don't come in thinking you know better because you're older or you have more degrees. We're the experts on our own experiences. Trust us to lead. Meanwhile, Megan had joined a group of young women who were working to address period poverty and menstrual equity in schools. The conversation was led by 15-year-old Aaliyah, who had started advocating for free menstrual products in school bathrooms after watching classmates miss school because they couldn't afford tampons or pads. It's 2023, and we're still having to convince adults that basic hygiene products should be accessible to all students, Aaliyah said with a mixture of frustration and determination. No one should have to choose between eating lunch and buying tampons. No one should miss school because of their period. Her advocacy had led to policy changes in her school district, and she was now working with legislators to pass state-level menstrual equity legislation. At 15, she was testifying before state committees and organizing community campaigns with the skill and poise of seasoned activists. What frustrates me most, Aaliyah continued, is that adults act like this is complicated when it's really simple. Put free menstrual products in all school bathrooms, just like you put free toilet paper there. Fund it the same way you fund other basic necessities. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. Megan found herself taking notes, not for publicity purposes, but because these young women were proposing practical solutions that could be implemented immediately with the right support and funding. Their approach was refreshingly direct and unencumbered by the bureaucratic complications that often stymied adult-led initiatives. As the summit drew to a close, Harry and Meghan participated in a large group discussion about what authentic allyship looked like from adults who wanted to support youth-led movements. The feedback was consistent and clear: listen, amplify, and follow the lead of young people rather than try and take over or redirect their efforts. "We don't need you to save us," said Jerome, a 16-year-old who had organized school walkouts in response to gun violence. "We need you to use your platforms and resources to support the work we're already doing. We need you to show up when the cameras aren't rolling and when it's not trendy anymore." The honesty was refreshing and challenging. These young people had learned to be skeptical of adult promises and performative support. They had been disappointed too many times by adults who showed up with fanfare and then disappeared when sustained effort was required. "We want to do better," Meghan said simply. "Help us understand how." What followed was one of the most productive conversations about authentic partnership between adults and youth that any of them had experienced. The young activists shared specific examples of what meaningful support looked like: funding without strings attached, platforms for youth voices without adult interpretation, and sustained relationships rather than one-off encounters. As Harry and Meghan prepared to leave Brooklyn that evening, they carried with them not just inspiration, but a clear understanding of their role. These young people didn't need them to be saviors or figureheads. They needed them to be consistent allies who would use their privilege and platform to elevate youth voices and support youth-led solutions. The flight back to California was spent in deep conversation about how they could restructure their foundation's work to better support these kinds of grassroots, youth-led initiatives. They talked about moving away from traditional charity models toward partnership models that recognized young people as experts and leaders rather than beneficiaries. "They're already doing the work," Harry reflected as they prepare to land. "They just need adults who are willing to step back and let them lead." It was a lesson that would reshape their approach to advocacy and philanthropy, grounding their future work in the wisdom and leadership of the young people they had met in Brooklyn and communities like it around the world. 6 months had passed since their transformative experience in Brooklyn, and Harry and Meghan found themselves standing in the arrivals hall of Kigali International Airport in Rwanda. The warm African air carried familiar scents that brought back memories of Harry's previous visits to the continent. But this trip was different. They weren't here as representatives of the British royal family, or even as celebrities making a charitable appearance. They were here as parents, advocates, and students ready to learn from young people who were reshaping their communities in the aftermath of unimaginable trauma. Their first destination was the Kigali Genocide Memorial, where they would meet with a group of young Rwandans who had formed an organization called Ubuntu Youth, a collective focused on healing, reconciliation, and building bridges between communities that had been torn apart by the 1994 genocide. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that they were learning about forgiveness and rebuilding from young people who had inherited a legacy of pain that most people couldn't comprehend. 23-year-old Grace Uwimana was waiting for them at the memorial entrance. Born 5 years after the genocide, she represented a generation that hadn't lived through the 100 Days of Horror, but carried its weight nonetheless. Her parents were survivors who had lost most of their families, and Grace had grown up with the complex task of honoring the past while building a different future. "Welcome to Rwanda," Grace said with a warm smile that immediately put them at ease. "I want to show you something before we meet with the others." She led them to a section of the memorial where photographs of children killed during the genocide lined the walls. Harry and Meghan walked silently through the corridors, absorbing the magnitude of loss represented in each young face. But Grace wasn't showing them this to overwhelm them with grief. She had a different lesson in mind. "Every one of these children had dreams," Grace said quietly. "They wanted to be doctors, teachers, artists, parents. When I look at these photos, I don't just see victims of hate. I see possibilities that were stolen." My generation's job is to live out some of those dreams, to create the Rwanda these children would have wanted to see. Her perspective was both heartbreaking and hopeful, reflecting a maturity that seemed impossible for someone so young. She explained how Ubuntu Youth worked with young people from both survivor and perpetrator families, helping them navigate the complex emotions and relationships that came with their inherited history. We don't ignore what happened, Grace continued as they walked toward a community center where other members of the group were waiting. But we refuse to let it define our limits. We're building something new together. Inside the center, Harry and Megan met 12 other young people ranging in age from 16 to 25. Each had their own story of how the genocide's legacy had shaped their lives. But what struck the couple most was how these young people had chosen to transform their pain into purpose. 21-year-old Samuel, whose father had been imprisoned for his role in the genocide, talked about the shame and confusion he had carried throughout his childhood. I spent years hating myself for something I didn't do, carrying guilt that wasn't mine to carry. But Ubuntu Youth taught me that I could honor the victims by choosing to be different, by building instead of destroying. Samuel had started a small business making furniture, and he employed young people from various backgrounds, deliberately creating a workspace where former enemies could become collaborators. His workshop had become a symbol of practical reconciliation, proving that economic cooperation could heal social wounds. At first, some of the survivor families didn't trust me because of my father's history, Samuel admitted. But Grace and the others helped them see that I wasn't my father. They gave me a chance to prove who I choose to be. Megan was deeply moved by the courage it took for both Samuel and the survivor families to risk this kind of trust. How do you find the strength to keep believing in forgiveness when the pain is so real? She asked. It was 18-year-old Hope who answered, her name carrying particular weight given her perspective. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or saying that what happened was okay. Forgiveness is about refusing to let the people who caused harm continue to control your life. When I hold on to hate, they're still winning. When I choose to build something beautiful, I take my power back. Hope's mother had been raped during the genocide and had considered ending the pregnancy that resulted. Hope carried the complex reality of being both a survivor's daughter and a product of violence, yet she radiated a strength that seemed to illuminate the entire room. My mother chose life, and now I choose to make that life meaningful, Hope continued. I tutor children whose parents can't afford school fees. I organize community gardens where families can grow food together. I'm studying to become a lawyer so I can help other women who have survived violence. Every day, I choose to be proof that beauty can come from ashes. Harry listened with growing amazement and humility. These young people had faced challenges that dwarfed his own struggles, yet they spoke with wisdom and purpose that inspired rather than overwhelmed. He thought about his own journey through grief and anger after his mother's death, recognizing that his healing had been supported by resources and privileges that weren't available to most people. What you've accomplished here, Harry said slowly, the way you've chosen to respond to inherited trauma, it's extraordinary. But it also shouldn't be necessary. You shouldn't have to carry the weight of healing your communities on your own. But we're not alone, Grace replied with conviction. We have each other, and we're building support systems that didn't exist for our parents' generation. Yes, it's hard work, but it's also powerful work. We're proving that cycles of violence can be broken. The afternoon was spent participating in various Ubuntu youth programs. Harry joined a group of young men who were learning conflict resolution skills, practicing scenarios that ranged from family disputes to community tensions. These weren't theoretical exercises. These young people were preparing to mediate real conflicts in their neighborhoods and families. Meanwhile, Megan spent time with a group of young women who were working on economic empowerment initiatives. They had started a cooperative that produced traditional Rwandan crafts for local and international markets, but their goals went beyond generating income. They were creating spaces where women from different backgrounds could work together, share skills, and build relationships that transcended historical divisions. Economic independence gives us choices, explained 19-year-old Immaculate as she demonstrated the intricate process of weaving traditional baskets. When women can support themselves and their families, they can make decisions based on what's best for their future rather than just survival. This cooperative isn't just about making money. It's about making possibilities. The women in the cooperative came from all backgrounds. Some are children of survivors. Others had family members who had perpetrated violence. And still others came from families that had been bystanders during the genocide. Yet they worked side by side with an ease that belied the complexity of their shared history. It wasn't always this comfortable, admitted 24-year-old Vestine, who served as the cooperative's coordinator. There were difficult conversations, tears, arguments about responsibility and blame. But we kept showing up, kept talking, kept working together. Eventually, we realized that our shared commitment to building something better was stronger than our different histories. As the day progressed, Harry and Meghan witnessed countless small moments of connection and collaboration that reflected the larger transformation these young people were creating. They saw former enemies' children playing together while their mothers worked. They observed young men who might have been raised as rivals sharing tools and techniques. They experienced the powerful reality of how individual choices to forgive and rebuild could create collective change. The evening concluded with a community feast where families from across the neighborhood gathered to share food and stories. Harry and Meghan found themselves seated between Grace and Samuel, listening as community elders shared gratitude for the bridge-building work the young people were doing. "When we see these children working together," said one elderly woman whose entire family had been killed except for one daughter, "we know that the killers didn't win. They try to destroy our future, but our future is sitting right here, choosing to love instead of hate." The emotional weight of her words settled over the gathering, but it wasn't a heavy silence. It was the pregnant quiet of hope being born, of wounds being transformed into wisdom. Later that evening, as they sat with the Ubuntu youth members under a sky brilliant with stars, Harry and Meghan reflected on what they had learned. These young people weren't just healing from trauma. They were actively creating new models for community building that could be applied anywhere people had experienced division and conflict. "You're not just rebuilding your own communities," Meghan observed. "You're showing the whole world what's possible when people choose hope over hate." "That's exactly right," Grace replied. "Rwanda's story doesn't end with genocide. Our story is about what comes after, about what people can create when they refuse to be defined by the worst things that happen to them." As they prepared to return to their hotel, Samuel approached Harry with a small wooden figure he had carved. "This is for your son," he said simply. "It's a traditional Rwandan warrior, but this warrior fights with love instead of swords. I hope Archie will grow up knowing that strength comes from building, not destroying." The gift carried profound meaning, representing not just the artistic skill of its creator, but the philosophy that guided these remarkable young people. They had inherited a legacy of division and chose to create unity. They had received trauma and chose to generate healing. They had been given reasons for hate and chose to multiply love. Flying home to California the next day, Harry and Meghan carried more than memories and gifts. They carried a new understanding of resilience, forgiveness, and the extraordinary capacity of young people to transform their communities when given support and opportunity. The lessons learned in Rwanda would influence every aspect of their future work, grounding their advocacy in the wisdom of young people who had proven that even the most devastating wounds could become sources of strength and compassion. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn golden when Harry and Meghan arrived in Manchester, England, for what would become one of their most emotionally challenging yet transformative encounters with young people. They had been invited to meet with survivors of the Manchester Arena bombing, particularly focusing on the teenagers and young adults who had been at the Ariana Grande concert on that devastating night in May 2017. The venue was a community center in a quiet neighborhood, far from media attention and political rhetoric that often surrounded discussions of terrorism and its aftermath. Here, young people who had survived the attack, and their families had been gathering for monthly support meetings, creating a space where they could process their experiences without judgment or pressure to move on according to anyone else's timeline. 19-year-old Freya Johnson was the first person they met, and her story immediately challenged any preconceived notions about what a survivor should look like. Physically, she bore no visible scars from that night. She hadn't been injured in the explosion, hadn't lost any limbs, or suffered burns. But her wounds were no less real, and in many ways, they were harder for others to understand and validate. People expect survivors to look broken, Freya explained as she led Harry and Meghan into the main meeting room. When you can't see our injuries, it's easier for people to think we should just be grateful we're alive and get over it. But trauma doesn't work that way. Freya had been with her best friend Emily that night, both of them 17 and excited to see their favorite artist perform. They had been standing near the exit when the bomb exploded, close enough to hear the blast, see the chaos, smell the smoke, and witness scenes that would replay in their minds for years to come. Emily and I weren't physically hurt, so everyone kept telling us how lucky we were, Freya continued. But we didn't feel lucky. We felt guilty for being okay when other people died. We felt scared all the time. We stopped going to concerts, stopped going to crowded places. We had nightmares and panic attacks, but people would say things like, "At least you're alive," as if that meant we weren't allowed to struggle. Her experience resonated deeply with Harry, who understood how invisible wounds could be just as debilitating as physical ones. The pressure to appear grateful and normal when you're struggling internally was something he knew intimately from his own journey through grief and trauma. Survivor's guilt is real, Harry said quietly, and it's devastating. The fact that you're here, sharing your story, and supporting other people shows incredible strength. But you shouldn't have had to figure out how to heal on your own. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other group members, young people ranging in age from 16 to 25 who had all been affected by the bombing in different ways. Some had been at the concert and escaped physically unharmed but emotionally shattered. Others had been injured and were still dealing with ongoing medical treatments. Still others had lost friends or family members that night and were navigating complex grief while trying to rebuild their sense of safety in the world. 22-year-old James Martinez rolled his wheelchair into the circle with a confidence that immediately commanded respect. He had lost his left leg below the knee in the explosion and spent months in the hospital learning to walk again. But his focus wasn't on what he had lost. It was on what he and his fellow survivors were building together. The worst thing about that night wasn't the physical injury, James said, his voice steady and clear. It was the way some people treated us afterward, like we were either heroes for surviving or victims to be pitted. We're neither. We're just people who went through something terrible and are figuring out how to keep living. James had become an advocate for better mental health resources for trauma survivors, particularly focusing on the need for long-term support that recognized that healing isn't linear and doesn't follow convenient timelines. He had testified before Parliament about gaps in the healthcare system and had started a peer support network that connected survivors of various traumatic events. The thing is, James continued, we have expertise that no one else has. We know what it's like to have your sense of safety shattered. We know what kinds of support actually help and what kinds of support feel performative or patronizing. But too often, the adults making decisions about our care don't actually listen to what we're telling them we need. Meghan found herself thinking about all the young people they had met over the past year, the activists in Brooklyn, the community builders in Rwanda, and now these survivors in Manchester. Despite their vastly different experiences, they all shared a common frustration, being underestimated and overlooked by adults who claimed to want to help them, but struggled to truly listen to their voices and respect their expertise. 16-year-old Aisha Khan joined the conversation, her hijab neatly arranged around her face and her expression serious but determined. She had been at the concert with her older sister and had witnessed not only the immediate trauma of the attack, but also the Islamophobic backlash that followed in their community. People kept asking me how it felt to be attacked by someone from my own religion. Aisha said, her voice carrying a frustration that spoke to experiences no teenager should have to navigate. As if I was responsible for explaining or defending something I had nothing to do with. I was a victim of that attack, just like everyone else, but somehow I was also expected to apologize for it. Aisha had channeled her anger into education and advocacy, working with local schools to develop programs that addressed both trauma support and religious literacy. Her goal was to ensure that young people could process their experiences without falling into patterns of blame and stereotyping that would only create more division. I refused to let that man's hatred turn me into someone hateful, Aisha explained. My faith teaches me about peace and compassion, and I'm not going to let a terrorist redefine what my religion means. Instead, I'm going to make sure other young people understand that we can heal from trauma without creating more trauma for others. Her approach was both personal and political, recognizing that her individual healing was connected to broader community healing. She had organized interfaith dialogue sessions where survivors from different backgrounds could share their experiences and build understanding across religious and cultural lines. As the afternoon progressed, Harry and Meghan participated in the group's regular activities, which included art therapy, peer counseling sessions, and practical workshops on managing anxiety and trauma responses. What struck them most was how the young people had taken ownership of their healing process, creating support systems that worked for them rather than trying to fit into programs designed by adults who hadn't shared their experiences. Traditional therapy helped some of us, explained 20-year-old Connor Williams, who had been working with a professional counselor for 2 years after the attack. But the most important healing happened here, with people who really understood what we'd been through. We could talk about the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way certain sounds would send us into panic attacks, and nobody would try to fix us or rush us through the process. The peer support model they had developed was sophisticated and effective, with group members trained in basic counseling techniques and crisis intervention. They had created a system where survivors could contact each other during difficult moments, attend drop-in sessions when they needed immediate support, and participate in longer-term healing activities that addressed both individual and collective trauma. We're not trying to replace professional therapy, clarified Emma Thompson, a 21-year-old social work student who had lost her best friend in the attack. But we've learned that healing happens in community as much as it happens in individual treatment. We need both. Emma had been instrumental in developing the group's advocacy efforts, working with local government officials and healthcare providers to improve trauma-informed care for young people. Her academic background, combined with her lived experience, had made her an effective bridge between the survivor community and the systems that were supposed to support them. The problem is that most trauma services are designed for adults, Emma explained to Harry and Meghan as they toured the center's resource library. But young people process trauma differently. We're still developing our sense of identity and our understanding of the world. When something like this happens during that crucial developmental period, we need support that recognizes how it affects everything. Our relationships, our education, our career plans, our basic sense of safety. The group had successfully advocated for specialized trauma services for young people, including counselors who understood adolescent development and support programs that could be integrated with educational and career planning. Their efforts had resulted in policy changes that would benefit future generations of young trauma survivors. As the day drew to a close, the group gathered for what they called their Courage Circle, where members could share something they were proud of accomplishing since their last meeting. The achievements range from small personal victories like taking public transportation without anxiety to major milestones like graduating university or starting new relationships. I went to a concert last week, shared 17-year-old Sophie. Her voice barely above a whisper, but her pride unmistakable. It was just a small venue, and I brought 3 friends with me, and I kept my phone out so I could call someone if I needed to leave. But I stayed for the whole show, and I even sang along to some of the songs. The circle erupted in gentle applause and words of encouragement. For people who hadn't been through trauma, Sophie's achievement might seem small or insignificant. But everyone in that room understood the courage it had taken for her to reclaim something that the bomber had tried to steal from her. "That's huge, Sophie," said Freya, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You're taking your life back, one step at a time." Harry and Meghan were invited to share something they were proud of as well, and they found themselves talking about their journey over the past year, learning from young people like those in the circle who had taught them about resilience, advocacy, and authentic service. "We came here thinking we might be able to offer you something," Meghan said honestly. "But you've given us so much more than we could ever give you. You've shown us what real strength looks like, and what it means to transform pain into purpose." "We're not trying to be inspirational," Connor replied with a slight smile. "We're just trying to keep living." "That's exactly what makes you inspirational," Harry responded. "The fact that you're choosing to keep living, keep growing, keep supporting each other, that's everything." As they prepared to leave Manchester that evening, Harry and Meghan carried with them a deeper understanding of how trauma could be transformed through community, how young people could become healers even as they continued their own healing journeys, and how resilience wasn't about bouncing back to who you were before, but about growing into someone new and stronger because of what you survived. The drive through the English countryside was quiet, both of them processing the intensity and beauty of what they had witnessed. These young people hadn't just survived a terrorist attack. They had refused to let that attack define the limits of their lives. They had created something powerful and healing from their pain, and in doing so, they had become exactly the kind of leaders the world needed, people who understood both trauma and hope, both vulnerability and strength. 1 year after their journey began with that first visit to the Assistance League of Los Angeles, Harry and Meghan found themselves back where it all started, but this time they weren't arriving as visitors. They were coming home to a community that had become family, to young people who had taught them more about service, courage, and love than any royal protocol ever could. The occasion was special. The Assistance League was opening a new youth center, and many of the programs that had been established over the past year were being launched in this dedicated space. But more than that, Harry and Meghan were announcing the next phase of their foundation's work, an initiative that would be entirely led by the young people they had met across their travels, with adult support that followed rather than directed. Maria, now 9 years old and more confident than ever, was among the first to greet them as they arrived. She had grown taller, her smile was brighter, and she clutched a painted butterfly in her small hands, a gift she had made for Meghan during one of their regular art sessions over the past year. "I finished it," Maria announced proudly, holding up the ceramic butterfly whose wings were painted in brilliant blues and purples. "You said butterflies remind us that beautiful changes are possible, so I made you one that will never change back." Meghan knelt down to receive the gift, her eyes filling with tears at the thoughtfulness and symbolism of Maria's creation. Over the past year, she and Harry had kept their promise to come back regularly, not just for formal visits, but for homework sessions, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons when the children simply needed to know that the adults in their lives would show up consistently. "It's perfect, Maria," Meghan said, cradling the butterfly carefully. "Just like you're perfect, exactly as you are, while also growing into all the amazing things you're going to become." The transformation in Maria was remarkable, but not unique. Carlos, now 11, had indeed moved in with his grandmother and had started a small garden behind their apartment building where he grew vegetables that he shared with neighbors. His sunflowers, planted last spring, had grown taller than he was, their faces turned perpetually toward the light, just as he had predicted. They survived the summer heat, the wind, everything, Carlos told Harry as they walked through the garden together. "My abuela says they're like our family, strong roots, tall growth, always looking for sunshine even in dark times." Carlos had become something of a neighborhood legend for his gardening skills and his generous spirit. He had convinced the apartment complex manager to let other children help with the garden, and it had become a gathering place where kids could learn about growing food while processing their own growth and changes. Marcus, the teenager who had initially tested Harry's authenticity with skeptical questions about royalty, was now 18 and preparing to start college in the fall. He had not only secured his own stable housing, but had become a mentor to younger teens in the program, offering the kind of practical guidance and emotional support that only someone who had walked that path could provide. "Remember when you said that being royal doesn't make you special?" Marcus asked Harry as they stood together watching younger children play in a new recreational space. "Well, I figured out that being from the streets doesn't make you less special either. We all have something valuable to offer if someone takes time to see it." Marcus had been accepted to 3 universities with full scholarships and planned to study social work with a focus on youth development. His goal was to return to his community as a professional advocate for young people aging out of foster care, using both his education and his lived experience to create better systems. "You were right about one thing," Marcus continued. "It's not about where you come from or what title you have. It's about how you choose to treat people, especially when they're going through tough times. You and Megan taught me that by how you treated us, not like charity cases or photo opportunities, but like people worth knowing and caring about." The youth center's opening ceremony was unlike any royal event Harry and Meghan had ever attended. Instead of ribbon cutting and speeches by dignitaries, the ceremony was planned and led entirely by the young people who would be using the space. They had insisted that the opening reflect their values and their vision for what the center could become. Jasmine, the teen mother from Brooklyn who had impressed them with her college aspirations, had flown in for the occasion. She was now midway through her freshman year at Columbia University, her daughter thriving in the university's childcare program that Jasmine had helped advocate for after their initial meeting. "I want to show you something," Jasmine said, pulling out her phone to share photos from a recent presentation she had given to the university's Board of Trustees. "I proposed a support program for student parents, not just childcare, but academic mentoring, financial planning, career guidance, all of it. They approved full funding for a pilot program." Jasmine's success wasn't just personal. She had become a spokesperson for student parents across the country, testifying before congressional committees about the need for better support systems in higher education. Her advocacy was directly impacting policy at the federal level, creating opportunities for thousands of young parents who might otherwise have to choose between their education and their children. "The thing is," Jasmine explained as they toured the new study spaces designed specifically for young parents, "I couldn't have done any of this without people believing in me first. You too, the staff here, other young parents who share their stories. All of that belief gave me permission to believe in myself." Grace from Rwanda had also made the journey to Los Angeles, representing the international dimension of the work that had emerged from that initial visit to the Assistance League. The Ubuntu Youth model had been adapted and implemented in several other post-conflict communities, and Grace was now working with the United Nations to develop global standards for youth-led reconciliation programs. "What we learned in Rwanda," Grace told the gathered crowd during the opening ceremony, "is that young people don't just inherit the problems of previous generations. We also inherit the power to solve them differently. When adults trust us to lead, when they support without controlling, we can create changes that seemed impossible." The youth center had been designed with input from young people from all of the communities Harry and Meghan had visited over the past year. There were quiet spaces for individual reflection and counseling, collaborative areas for group work and mutual support, technology labs for digital literacy and creativity, and flexible spaces that could be reconfigured for different activities and needs. But the most innovative feature was what the young people had called the Story Wall, a digital installation where young people could share their experiences, challenges, and victories with others facing similar situations. It wasn't social media. It was a carefully moderated platform designed to create connection and support across geographic and cultural boundaries. "Stories have power," explained Zura, the mental health advocate from Brooklyn who had become the lead designer of the Storywall project. When we share our real stories, not the sanitized versions, but the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of what we've been through, other people feel less alone. And when people feel less alone, they have more courage to keep going. The story wall already contained hundreds of entries from young people around the world, survivors sharing healing strategies, activists offering encouragement, students providing academic tips, and young parents exchanging practical advice. It had become a global support network that operated 24 hours a day in multiple languages. This is what authentic connection looks like, Zara continued. Not adults trying to fix us or inspire us, but young people supporting other young people with the wisdom we've gained from our own experiences. As the afternoon progressed, Harry and Meghan found themselves in conversation after conversation with young people who had become not just beneficiaries of support programs, but leaders of movements that were creating systemic change. They listened to Destiny talk about the Teenage Parent Support Network that now operated in 12 cities. They heard Samuel describe the reconciliation workshops that had been adapted for communities dealing with racial and ethnic tensions in the United States. They learned about the trauma-informed peer support model developed by the Manchester survivors that was being implemented in hospitals and schools across Europe. What strikes me most, Meghan reflected during her remarks of the ceremony, is that every young person we've met over the past year has taught us the same lesson in different ways. That healing happens in community, that leadership comes from lived experience, and that real change happens when we trust young people to be the experts on their own lives. She spoke about how their understanding of service had been transformed through these relationships, moving away from traditional charity models toward partnership and solidarity. She talked about learning to follow rather than lead, to amplify rather than speak over, and to provide resources without imposing agendas. Harry's remarks focused on the courage and wisdom he had witnessed from young people who had faced challenges that most adults couldn't imagine surviving, yet who had chosen to transform their pain into purpose and their experiences into expertise that could benefit others. "A year ago, we thought we were coming here to help," Harry said, gesturing toward the beautiful new center filled with young people who had become family. "What we discovered is that the young people we met didn't need us to save them. They needed us to believe in them, support their leadership, and get out of their way so they could do the amazing work they were already doing." The ceremony concluded with a celebration that perfectly captured the spirit of community and joy that had characterized their entire journey. There was music performed by young artists, food prepared by youth culinary programs, and artwork created by children and teenagers who had found healing and expression through creative outlets. As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting golden light through the windows of the new youth center, Harry and Meghan stood together watching the young people who had become their teachers, their inspiration, and their partners in creating change. Maria ran up to them one final time, tugging on both of their hands. "Will you keep coming back?" she asked, echoing the question she had posed a year earlier, but with more confidence this time, as if she already knew the answer. "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Meghan replied, using an expression that made Maria giggle. "We're family now," Harry added simply. "Family shows up for each other." As they prepared to leave that evening, Harry and Meghan carried with them not just memories of a successful program launch, but a deep understanding of what authentic service looked like. They had learned that the most powerful thing they could offer wasn't their celebrity or their resources, but their willingness to listen, learn, and follow the lead of young people who were already creating the change they wanted to see in the world. The drive home through the familiar streets of their adopted city was quiet but filled with contentment. They had found their purpose not in grand gestures or global stages, but in the simple act of showing up consistently for young people who had taught them that healing, hope, and transformation were always possible when grounded in authentic relationships and genuine respect. Their journey had come full circle, but it was really just the beginning. The young people they had met would continue to lead, grow, and create change in their communities and beyond. And Harry and Meghan would continue to support, amplify, and learn from them, knowing that they have been given the privilege of witnessing some of the most important work happening in the world. The work of young people who refuse to let their circumstances define their possibilities. The butterfly that Maria had given Meghan sat on the dashboard as they drove, its painted wings catching the last rays of sunlight, a perfect symbol of the beautiful transformations that were not only possible, but already taking place in communities around the world, led by young people who understood that change begins with the courage to believe in something better.